You know, I guess the multi-million-dollar question when it comes to the KRG right now and the new federal budget is, what is the new arrangement and what are the new banking arrangements? Does the KRG get to keep the money separately in separate accounts?
Well, I was going to speak in Kurdish, but I thought 3 languages would confuse the panel, so I'll stick to English if that's okay. Thank you for the event and for inviting us, Dr. Barham, everybody. The new arrangements, so we have a new budget law that has been passed by the Council of Ministers. This is it's an important step. There are obviously observations on the budget law, but in general, it is a budget law that has been passed. Now, I think we're a quarter of the way there. The next part has to be passing it through the Council of Representatives. Then we're half of the way there. The next half is the implementation of the budget law. And if it gets implemented in the letter and the spirit that it was written in, I think there is a lot of money in the country that could be shared equitably for the federal government to have a significant fund at its disposal and for the regional government to do so as well. But that, as we've seen in the past with previous budget laws, is a big if.
I would press you on specifics, but I know better to do that in a public forum. Do you think that this will pass the Supreme Court's muster, given the sort of restrictions in the ruling?
I don't know. That's a very un-Kurdish thing of me to say I don't know, because we tend to know everything, but I don't know, because there are many potential pitfalls. There is a massive meteorite about to hit the country with the arbitration between Turkey and Iraq that could have a massive impact on the situation. There's several Supreme Court rulings in the pipeline, no pun intended, that could also impact the situation. So I think I don't want to be too gloomy and depress everybody first thing in the morning, but there are challenges. And I think that the closer the federal government and the regional government are to each other, the more likely we are to overcome these challenges.
Am I correct in thinking that the 400 billion dinars that was recently transferred to the KRG was in the form of a loan and not an allocation? Because some people would argue that seems like a cosmetic workaround to be able to acquiesce to the FSC ruling. So, given that, there are some who raise the spectre that the new arrangement with Baghdad will similarly rely on cosmetic approaches.
Look, I think we can't live with cosmetic arrangements anymore. We need to finalize once and for all the oil policy in this country. For years, we've been patching up this country with budget laws, with side agreements, with kind of well-intentioned agreements, but we've always fallen short when it comes to the oil side of it. Is the oil regime in Kurdistan legitimate or not? The federal court ruling has ruled a certain way. What does that do? So I think we will never address the financial problems between Kurdistan and the rest of the country until we have an oil law. An oil law that is very explicit in terms of the roles and responsibilities of everybody involved. Who's in charge of looking for oil? Who's in charge of extracting the oil? Who's in charge of exporting the oil? And who's in charge of selling the oil? And then who's in charge of receiving the money from the sale of that oil? And then who's in charge of distributing that money, hopefully equitably? I think that's the fundamental issue that we need to address. I don't think this budget law, as good or as bad as it may be, addresses that issue.
Since you bring that up, I think Trafigura ended its oil export deal with the KRG, and the company said that it was still owed $273 million under the prepayment contract, which the KRG allegedly refused to renegotiate. And so, given the history of issues on payments, And what you just said about the sort of lack of legislation, how do you maintain investor confidence in the KLG's oil and gas sector, both politically and institutionally, given all of these issues?
We have to have, again, a lasting deal that is sustainable and constitutional and implementable with Baghdad. And that's when investors will finally be confident in the system that we have. For years, the Constitution gave the international oil companies the confidence to invest in Kurdistan's oil and gas sector. But the federal court ruling changed that. Now there are question marks, which impacts the price of our oil, it impacts the buyers of our oil, and it impacts the political situation in Iraq and in Kurdistan. So to get that confidence, we need an oil law that is clear and explicit, and that makes the sale of this product clear. And I think for too long, we have all been arguing over the wrong part of this discussion. So much discussion over the last 10 years has been on the sovereignty of who has the right to carry out a contract to look for the oil. That's the argument. I remember going back to 2007, 8, the good old days of Shahrastani and Ashti Haurami battles of what's legal and what's not legal. Is it legal? Are these contract legal? This was a, now looking back at it, I don't know how many years later, it was a futile argument. The argument we should have had back then is, what do we do with this oil once it's out of the ground? And that's, I think, again, that's where the solution is. Because for me, personally, and there are different opinions inside the KRG on this, I don't care who sells our oil. Whoever sells it for the best price should sell our oil. Whoever can sell our oil in the most transparent way should sell our oil. I care more about what happens to the revenue. When do I get my share? How do the IOCs get their share? How is the debt repaid? And where's the federal government in this argument? And I think we have not really had that argument in the 15 years we've been debating the oil issue. And I think it's time now to really tackle that. Again, I don't want to take anything away from the hard work that was put in to get this budget law passed, but this isn't going to solve the billion-dollar question, the multi-billion-dollar question of what happens to oil revenues in the country.
Thank you. Oh. You got applause for that controversial Obi Dodge. And I quote, "Did I just hear Deputy PM Taڵەbانی step away from the KRG's interpretation of the Iraqi constitution?"
No. No, I did not step away from the KRG's interpretation of the Constitution, because the Constitution is not clear about who has the right to sell. The Constitution is quite clear about how you differentiate between existing fields as of the time that the Constitution was written and future fields. It talks about the management of those fields, but there's nothing that gives clarity on the export and sale. So I think I'm in line with my own belief, and also I think many legal experts that have differentiated those two elements of the oil process. Go on.
No.
Go on, I know.
I mean,
Go on, I know
is the solution just sell? Is the more logical solution to sell through SOMO?
In my opinion, I will caveat that, this may not be the opinion of the Kurdistan regional government, but in my opinion, we need to restructure SOMO, create a new marketing entity that is federal with regional participation, that markets and sells the oil of the country. And that then gets out of this kind of game of us, We were thankful for the traders that traded our oil in that period, but we need to cross this period. We need a new system, a new organization that can market the oil, sell the oil, and then we need a new entity to redistribute the revenues of that oil. And I think that, for me, that's the long-term, sustainable, constitutional, and implementable solution to this problem.